The relentless rain pounded against the cracked windowpane of Sarah Johnson's tiny apartment in the heart of New York City. The young woman sat huddled on her threadbare couch, clutching a worn photograph to her chest. Tears streamed down her face, mingling with the raindrops that had seeped through the leaky ceiling. "Oh, Mama," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. "I promise I'll make you proud. Somehow, someway, I'll turn our lives around." At just 25 years old, Sarah had already endured more hardship than most people face in a lifetime. Orphaned at 18 when her beloved mother succumbed to cancer, she had been forced to abandon her dreams of college and take on any job she could find to survive. Now, she worked as a lowly janitor at Titan Enterprises, one of the largest corporations in the city. As the first rays of dawn began to peek through the clouds, Sarah wiped away her tears and stood up with determination. She couldn't afford to be late for work, not when she was already on thin ice with her temperamental boss, the infamous Maxwell Stone. Donning her faded uniform, Sarah made her way through the bustling streets of New York. The city was coming to life, with suits and briefcases rushing past her in a blur. She kept her head down, painfully aware of the stark contrast between her shabby appearance and the sleek professionals surrounding her. As she approached the towering skyscraper that housed Titan Enterprises, Sarah's heart began to race. Every day, she prayed that she would go unnoticed, able to complete her duties without drawing the ire of the executive floor. But fate, it seemed, had other plans for her that day. The elevator doors opened on the top floor, and Sarah cautiously pushed her cleaning cart into the plush hallway. She had just begun to polish the marble floors when a booming voice made her jump. Well. If it isn't our little Cinderella, come to scrub the floors." Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized the mocking tone of Maxwell Stone, CEO of Titan Enterprises and the most feared man in the building. She slowly turned to face him, her cheeks burning with humiliation. Maxwell Stone was the epitome of power and success. His tailored suit probably cost more than Sarah made in a year, and his piercing blue eyes seemed to look right through her. At his side stood Amanda Prescott, his assistant and rumored mistress, her perfect lips curled into a sneer. "I'm sorry, Mr. Stone," Sarah mumbled, keeping her eyes fixed on the floor. "I'll be out of your way in just a moment." Maxwell's laughter echoed through the hallway, sending chills down Sarah's spine. "Oh, don't rush on our account, dear. After all, we wouldn't want to deprive you of the only view of luxury you'll ever have in your pitiful life." Amanda tittered, her manicured hand resting possessively on Maxwell's arm. "Honestly, Max, I don't know why you even bother acknowledging the help. They're like furniture, meant to be used and ignored." Sarah's hands trembled as she gripped her mop tighter, willing herself not to cry. She had endured their taunts for months, but each encounter left her feeling more broken than the last. Maxwell's eyes narrowed as he observed Sarah's reaction. "Tell me, little mouse, do you ever dream of rising above your station? Of trading in that mop for a corner office?" Before Sarah could respond, Amanda interjected with a cruel laugh. "As if someone like her could ever amount to anything. Some people are born for greatness, Max, and others." She gestured dismissively at Sarah. "Well, they're born to serve those who are." Something inside Sarah snapped at that moment. Years of pent-up frustration and pain bubbled to the surface, and before she could stop herself, words spilled from her lips. "You're wrong," she said softly, raising her eyes to meet Maxwell's startled gaze. "My mother always told me that true greatness comes from kindness and integrity, not from stepping on others to get ahead." The hallway fell silent, the tension palpable. Maxwell's face contorted with rage, his eyes flashing dangerously. "How dare you speak to me that way, you insolent little dash." But his tirade was cut short by the sudden appearance of an elderly man at the end of the hallway. Herbert Thornton, the founder of Titan Enterprises and Maxwell's mentor, walked slowly towards the group, his wise eyes taking in the scene before him. Is there a problem here, Maxwell? Herbert asked, his voice gentle but firm. Maxwell's demeanor changed instantly, a sycophantic smile replacing his sneer. Not at all, Mr. Thornton. Just having a chat with one of our dedicated employees. Herbert's gaze lingered on Sarah, a flicker of recognition passing across his face. And what's your name, young lady? Sarah Johnson, sir, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Something in Herbert's expression softened, and he nodded slowly. Johnson. I see. Well, Sarah, I hope you're finding your work here at Titan rewarding. Before Sarah could respond, Maxwell interrupted, clearly eager to steer the conversation away from the lowly janitor. Mr. Thornton, I have those reports you requested. Shall we discuss them in my office? As the group moved away, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just occurred. She had no way of knowing that this chance encounter would set in motion a chain of events that would change her life forever. Over the next few weeks, Sarah noticed subtle changes in her work environment. The snide comments from her coworkers seemed to lessen, and she occasionally caught Herbert Thornton watching her with an unreadable expression. But the respite was short-lived. One rainy afternoon, as Sarah was emptying trash bins in the executive suite, she overheard a heated conversation from Maxwell Stone's office. I'm telling you, Amanda, there's something fishy about that girl, Maxwell's voice carried through the partially open door. The way old man Thornton looked at her. I don't like it one bit. Amanda's sultry laugh followed. Oh, Max, you're being paranoid. She's a nobody, remember? Just focus on the takeover. Once we push Herbert out and you're in control of Titan, you can fire Little Miss Mop to your heart's content. Sarah's heart raced as she processed what she had just heard. A takeover? Pushing out Herbert Thornton? She knew she should walk away, pretend she hadn't heard anything, but something compelled her to stay. You're right, of course, Maxwell sighed. I just can't shake this feeling that she's going to be trouble. Maybe we should start documenting some infractions, give ourselves a reason to let her go sooner rather than later. Now you're talking, Amanda purred. Leave it to me, darling. I'll make sure our little Cinderella's fairy tale comes to an abrupt end. Horrified, Sarah backed away from the door, her mind reeling. She had always known that Maxwell Stone was ruthless, but this level of cruelty and deception was beyond anything she had imagined. And poor Mr. Thornton, who had always been kind to the employees, he had no idea what was coming. As Sarah made her way home that evening, the weight of what she had discovered pressed heavily on her shoulders. She knew she should tell someone, but who would believe a lowly janitor over the word of Maxwell Stone? And even if they did, what could she possibly do to stop him? Little did Sarah know, fate was about to intervene in the most unexpected way. The next morning, as she was scrubbing the lobby floors, a commotion near the entrance caught her attention. A distinguished-looking man in his 60s had slipped on the wet marble, falling hard onto his side. Without hesitation, Sarah rushed to his aid, helping him to his feet and ensuring he wasn't seriously injured. As she steadied him, their eyes met, and a jolt of recognition passed between them. Sarah, the man gasped, his voice filled with emotion. Sarah Johnson? Confused, Sarah nodded. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, do I know you? The man's eyes filled with tears as he grasped her hands tightly. My dear girl, I'm your father. Robert Johnson. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Sarah stared at the man before her, unable to process his words. Her father? But that was impossible. Her mother had always told her that her father had abandoned them before she was born. I don't understand, Sarah stammered, her mind racing. My mother said. Robert's face crumpled with grief. Oh, Sarah, there's so much you don't know. So much I need to explain. Please, can we go somewhere and talk? Still in shock, Sarah nodded numbly. She called her supervisor, claiming a family emergency, and followed Robert to a small cafe across the street from Titan Enterprises. As they settled into a quiet booth, Robert took a deep breath and began to unravel the mystery of Sarah's past. Your mother, Elizabeth, and I were young and in love, he started, his voice thick with emotion. But my family, the Thorntons, they didn't approve. They thought Elizabeth wasn't good enough for me, that she would hold me back from taking over the family business. Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. The Thorntons? You mean? Robert nodded sadly. Yes, Sarah. Herbert Thornton is your grandfather. And Maxwell Stone, he's your cousin. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. All this time, she had been working under the very people who had torn her family apart. The cruelty of Maxwell's actions took on a whole new dimension. But why? Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. Why didn't you fight for us? Robert's shoulders sagged with the weight of his regret. I was a coward, Sarah. I let my father manipulate me, convince me that leaving was the best thing for everyone. He promised to take care of you and your mother financially, but I see now that he never followed through. As Robert continued to explain the years of misunderstandings and manipulations that had kept them apart, Sarah's mind whirled with the implications. She thought of Herbert Thornton's strange behavior, the way he had looked at her with recognition. Had he known all along? Does Maxwell know? Sarah asked suddenly, remembering the conversation she had overheard. Robert shook his head. No, Herbert kept your existence a secret from most of the family. He was afraid of what Maxwell might do if he knew there was another potential heir to the Thornton fortune. Sarah let out a bitter laugh. Well, he doesn't need to worry about that. Maxwell's planning to push Herbert out and take control of Titan Enterprises. Robert's face paled. What? Are you sure? Sarah nodded grimly, recounting what she had overheard in Maxwell's office. As she spoke, a fire began to burn in Robert's eyes. We can't let this happen, he said firmly. Sarah, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but will you help me stop Maxwell and make things right? For a moment, Sarah hesitated. This man, her father, had been absent for her entire life. She had every right to turn her back on him and this complicated, messy situation. But as she looked into Robert's pleading eyes, she saw a reflection of her own determination and kindness, traits her mother had always said came from her father. Taking a deep breath, Sarah nodded. Yes, I'll help you. But not for you, or for the Thorntons. I'll do it because it's the right thing to do. Robert smiled, a mix of pride and sorrow in his eyes. You're so much like your mother. Brave and righteous to the core. As they began to formulate a plan to expose Maxwell's deceit and protect Titan Enterprises, Sarah couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. For the first time in her life, she felt like she had a purpose beyond just surviving. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would test her strength, challenge her convictions, and ultimately lead her to a destiny far greater than she could have ever imagined. The rain had stopped by the time Sarah and Robert left the cafe, but the air was still heavy with moisture. As they stood on the sidewalk, an awkward silence fell between them. I know this is a lot to take in, Robert said softly. And I know I have years of absence to make up for. But I want you to know, Sarah, that not a day went by when I didn't think of you and your mother. Sarah nodded, her emotions too tangled to form a coherent response. Part of her wanted to throw her arms around this man, her father, and make up for lost time. Another part wanted to scream at him for all the birthdays, all the milestones he had missed. I think. I think I need some time, she finally managed to say. This is all so overwhelming. Robert's face fell, but he nodded in understanding. Of course. Take all the time you need. But please, be careful around Maxwell. He's more dangerous than you know. As Sarah watched Robert walk away, she felt as though her entire world had been turned upside down. She was no longer just Sarah Johnson, the orphan janitor struggling to make ends meet. She was Sarah Johnson Thornton, heiress to one of the largest fortunes in New York City. The thought made her head spin. Over the next few days, Sarah went through the motions of her job at Titan Enterprises in a daze. Every time she saw Maxwell Stone striding through the hallways, every time she heard his booming laugh echoing from the executive offices, she felt a surge of anger and betrayal. This man, her own flesh and blood, had treated her with such cruelty and disdain. And now he was plotting to steal the company from her grandfather, a grandfather she had never known she had. As she mopped the floors of the lobby one evening, lost in thought, a gentle voice broke through her reverie. You know, for someone so young, you carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. Sarah looked up to see Herbert Thornton standing before her, his kind eyes twinkling with a mixture of sadness and affection. Mr. Thornton, she stammered, straightening up. I'm sorry, I didn't see you there. Herbert waved away her apology. No need to apologize, my dear. In fact, I believe it is I who owes you an apology. Many apologies, in fact. Sarah's heart began to race. Did he know? Had Robert told him about their meeting? As if reading her thoughts, Herbert continued, I've known who you were from the moment you started working here, Sarah. I've watched you from afar, marveling at your strength and kindness in the face of adversity. You remind me so much of your grandmother. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. Why, she whispered. Why didn't you say anything? Herbert sighed heavily, the weight of his regret evident in every line of his face. Fear, my dear. Fear and foolish pride. I thought I was protecting you by keeping your true identity a secret. But in doing so, I denied you your rightful place in this family. Can you ever forgive an old man's mistakes? Before Sarah could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the lobby. Maxwell Stone rounded the corner, his face darkening as he took in the scene before him. Well, he sneered. What's this? Fraternizing with the help, grandfather? Herbert's spine stiffened as he turned to face his grandson. Maxwell, I believe it's time we had a long overdue conversation. About family, about legacy, and about the true meaning of success. Maxwell's eyes narrowed suspiciously. What are you talking about? Herbert placed a protective hand on Sarah's shoulder. Maxwell, I'd like you to meet your cousin, Sarah Johnson Thornton. My granddaughter, and the true heir to Titan Enterprises. The color drained from Maxwell's face as he stared at Sarah in disbelief. In that moment, as the truth of her identity was revealed, Sarah felt a surge of strength she had never known before. She straightened her spine, looked Maxwell directly in the eye, and said clearly, Hello, cousin. I believe we have a lot to discuss. The tension in the Titan Enterprises lobby was thick enough to cut with a knife. Maxwell Stone's face contorted with a mixture of shock, disbelief, and rapidly growing anger as he processed the bombshell his grandfather had just dropped. This is preposterous. Maxwell sputtered, his normally composed demeanor crumbling before their eyes. You expect me to believe that this cleaning woman is a Thornton? Grandfather, have you lost your mind? Herbert Thornton stood firm, his hands still resting protectively on Sarah's shoulder. I assure you, Maxwell, I am in full possession of my faculties. Sarah is indeed your cousin, the daughter of your Uncle Robert. Maxwell's eyes darted between Sarah and Herbert, searching for any sign that this was some sort of elaborate joke. Finding none, his expression hardened into a mask of contempt. Even if what you're saying is true, he hissed, it changes nothing. This girl knows nothing about running a business. She's spent her life scrubbing toilets, for God's sake. You can't possibly think she has any claim to Titan Enterprises. Sarah, who had been silent until now, felt a surge of indignation rise within her. I may not have your education or your experience, Maxwell, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, but I know the value of hard work and integrity, something you seem to have forgotten. Maxwell's eyes flashed dangerously. You dare to speak to me about integrity? You, who have been lying about your identity this entire time. That's enough, Maxwell, Herbert interjected, his tone leaving no room for argument. Sarah only learned of her heritage recently. The blame for any deception lies squarely on my shoulders, and I intend to make amends for it. As the three stood locked in this tense standoff, the elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Amanda Prescott stepped out, her stiletto heels clicking against the marble floor as she approached the group. Max, darling, I've been looking everywhere for you, she purred, then paused as she took in the scene before her. What's going on here? Maxwell's jaw clenched as he turned to Amanda. It seems we have a little family reunion on our hands, my dear. Allow me to introduce you to my long-lost cousin, Sarah Johnson Thornton. Amanda's perfectly manicured eyebrows shot up in surprise. Cousin? But isn't that the janitor? Apparently, Maxwell replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm, our little Cinderella has been hiding a glass slipper all along. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. She had endured months of Amanda's snide comments and disdainful looks, but somehow, this felt even worse. Herbert, sensing the growing hostility, stepped in once more. I think it's best if we continue this discussion in private. Maxwell, Amanda, Sarah, please join me in my office. As they made their way to the executive floor, Sarah couldn't help but feel like she was walking into the lion's den. She had spent months avoiding this part of the building, and now here she was, about to enter the inner sanctum of Titan Enterprises. Herbert's office was everything Sarah had imagined it would be, spacious, elegantly decorated, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the New York skyline. As they settled into the plush leather chairs surrounding a massive mahogany desk, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was woefully out of place in her faded uniform. Herbert took his seat behind the desk, his fingers steepled as he regarded the three young people before him. Now then, he began, his voice grave, I believe it's time we laid all our cards on the table. Over the next hour, Herbert recounted the tragic tale of Robert and Elizabeth's forbidden love, the family's interference, and the years of separation that followed. Sarah listened with a mixture of fascination and heartbreak, finally understanding the full scope of the circumstances that had shaped her life. Maxwell, for his part, remained stone-faced throughout the story, while Amanda fidgeted uncomfortably in her seat. So you see, Herbert concluded, Sarah is as much a Thornton as you are, Maxwell. And as such, she has every right to be involved in the future of this company. Maxwell leaned forward, his eyes glinting with barely contained fury. With all due respect, grandfather, this is absurd. You can't seriously be considering bringing her into the fold. She has no experience, no education in business. It would be a disaster for Titan Enterprises. Perhaps, Herbert replied calmly, but she has something that I fear you've lost sight of, Maxwell, a true understanding of the value of hard work and the importance of treating all people with dignity and respect. Sarah, who had been quiet throughout the exchange, finally found her voice. Mr. Thornton, grandfather, she corrected herself, the word feeling foreign on her tongue, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but Maxwell is right about one thing. I don't know the first thing about running a company like Titan Enterprises. Herbert's eyes twinkled as he regarded her. My dear, that's precisely why I want you involved. You bring a fresh perspective, untainted by years of corporate politics and cutthroat tactics. But more importantly, you have a heart, something that is sorely needed in the business world these days. Maxwell scoffed. A heart doesn't make quarterly profits or satisfy shareholders, grandfather. No, Herbert agreed, but it does build loyalty, foster innovation, and create a work environment where people are motivated to give their best. These are the foundations upon which I built Titan Enterprises, Maxwell, and I fear they've been eroding under your leadership. The room fell silent as the weight of Herbert's words sank in. Sarah could see the muscle in Maxwell's jaw twitching as he fought to control his temper. So what exactly are you proposing? Maxwell finally asked, his voice tight with suppressed anger. Herbert leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I propose a challenge. For the next 6 months, both you and Sarah will work closely with me, learning every aspect of the business. At the end of that time, I will decide who is best suited to lead Titan Enterprises into the future. This is ridiculous! Maxwell exploded, jumping to his feet. I've dedicated my entire life to this company. I've increased our profits year after year. And now you want me to compete with a janitor for my rightful place? Sarah, emboldened by Herbert's faith in her, stood as well. Are you afraid of a little competition, cousin? Or are you worried that you might not measure up when it comes to more than just the bottom line? Maxwell's face flushed with rage as he rounded on Sarah. You have no idea what you're getting into, little girl. I will crush you. That's quite enough, Herbert's voice cracked like a whip, silencing them both. This is not up for debate. Either you both agree to this arrangement, or I will be forced to reconsider the entire leadership structure of Titan Enterprises, effective immediately. The threat hung in the air, its implications clear. Maxwell, realizing he had no choice, slowly sank back into his chair. Fine, he spat. I'll play your little game, grandfather. But don't expect me to hold her hand or do her job for her. I wouldn't dream of it, Sarah replied, her chin held high. I've been taking care of myself for a long time. I think I can manage without your help. Herbert nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. Excellent. We'll begin first thing tomorrow morning. Sarah, I'll have a new contract drawn up for you reflecting your change in status. And I think a shopping trip is in order, can't have you attending board meetings in your current attire. As the meeting adjourned, Sarah felt as though she were walking in a dream. In the span of a few short days, her entire world had been turned upside down. She was no longer Sarah Johnson, struggling janitor, she was Sarah Johnson Thornton, potential heiress to one of New York's largest corporations. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Sarah was thrust into a crash course in corporate America, attending meetings, poring over financial reports, and learning the intricacies of Titan Enterprises' various divisions. It was overwhelming, exhausting, and utterly exhilarating. Maxwell, true to his word, offered no assistance. In fact, he seemed to go out of his way to make things difficult for Sarah, accidentally leaving her off email chains for important meetings or assigning her impossible tasks with unreasonable deadlines. But Sarah refused to be intimidated. She worked twice as hard, staying late into the night to catch up on what she had missed during the day. Her years of struggle had taught her resilience, and she was determined to prove that she belonged in this world. To her surprise, Sarah found an unlikely ally in Amanda Prescott. The glamorous assistant, perhaps sensing which way the wind was blowing, began to distance herself from Maxwell and offer subtle assistance to Sarah. Don't let him see you sweat, Amanda advised one evening as they worked late in the office. Maxwell can smell weakness a mile away. You've got to stay strong, even when you feel like you're drowning. Sarah regarded Amanda curiously. Why are you helping me? I thought you and Maxwell were. Amanda's laugh was tinged with bitterness. Maxwell Stone doesn't love anyone but himself, honey. I was just smart enough to hitch my wagon to his star. But now? She shrugged elegantly. Let's just say I'm keeping my options open. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah began to find her footing in the corporate world. She discovered a natural aptitude for problem-solving and an ability to connect with employees at all levels of the company. Where Maxwell ruled through fear and intimidation, Sarah led with compassion and understanding. One particularly challenging project involved streamlining the company's manufacturing process to reduce costs without sacrificing quality or laying off workers. Maxwell's solution was predictably ruthless: outsource everything to cheaper overseas facilities and cut the domestic workforce by 30%. Sarah, however, took a different approach. She spent days on the factory floor, talking to workers, observing the process, and identifying inefficiencies. Her proposal involved investing in new technology and retraining existing staff, ultimately increasing productivity while preserving jobs. When both plans were presented to the board, the room was divided. Maxwell's plan offered quicker, more substantial profits in the short term, but Sarah's promised long-term stability and growth. As the board members debated, Herbert sat back and watched, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He could see the fire in Sarah's eyes, the passion with which she defended her ideas. It reminded him of himself in his younger days, when Titan Enterprises was just a fledgling company with big dreams. In the end, the board voted in favor of Sarah's plan, much to Maxwell's barely concealed rage. It was a turning point, not just for Sarah, but for the entire company. Employees who had long felt undervalued and disposable began to see a glimmer of hope for the future. But Maxwell was far from defeated. As Sarah's influence within the company grew, so did his determination to undermine her at every turn. He began to spread rumors among the board members, suggesting that Sarah's lack of formal education made her a liability to the company. One evening, as Sarah was working late in her newly appointed office, a far cry from the broom closet she once called her domain, she overheard a heated conversation from the hallway. "I'm telling you, she's not what she seems," Maxwell's voice carried through the partially open door. "I've had her background investigated. There are inconsistencies in her story." Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized the other voice, Charles Worthington, one of the most influential members of the board of directors. "What kind of inconsistencies?" Charles asked, his tone wary but interested. "Let's just say that her mother's death might not have been as straightforward as we've been led to believe," Maxwell replied, his voice dripping with insinuation. "And there are questions about where exactly Sarah was and what she was doing in the years between her mother's passing and her miraculous appearance at Titan Enterprises." Sarah felt as though the floor had dropped out from beneath her. She knew that Maxwell was grasping at straws, trying to discredit her by any means necessary. But the mention of her mother sent a jolt of pain through her heart. How dare he use her grief as a weapon against her? As the footsteps receded down the hallway, Sarah slumped in her chair, her mind racing. She had worked so hard to prove herself, to show that she belonged in this world. But now, with a few carefully chosen words, Maxwell threatened to unravel everything she had built. Sarah knew she had a choice to make. She could confront Maxwell directly, risking an all-out war that could tear the company apart. Or she could take the high road, continuing to prove her worth through her actions rather than her words. As she sat there, staring out at the glittering New York skyline, Sarah's thoughts drifted to her mother. Elizabeth Johnson had faced adversity her entire life, but she had never let it break her spirit. She had taught Sarah that true strength came not from defeating others, but from staying true to oneself in the face of hardship. With a deep breath, Sarah made her decision. She would not stoop to Maxwell's level. Instead, she would work harder, shine brighter, and show everyone at Titan Enterprises, including her vindictive cousin, exactly what she was made of. Little did Sarah know, her resolve was about to be tested in ways she could never have imagined. For even as she recommitted herself to the path of integrity, forces were aligning against her that would shake the very foundations of Titan Enterprises and force her to confront painful truths about her past, her family, and herself. As the first rays of dawn began to creep over the New York skyline, Sarah finally left her office, exhausted but determined. The coming days would bring challenges unlike any she had faced before, but she was ready. She was a Thornton, after all, and Thorntons never backed down from a fight. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the office earlier than usual, her mind still churning with the overheard conversation from the night before. As she stepped off the elevator, she nearly collided with Robert, her father, who was pacing anxiously in the hallway. "Sarah," he exclaimed, relief flooding his features. "I've been trying to reach you all night. We have a problem." Before Sarah could respond, Herbert emerged from his office, his face grave. "Both of you, come in. We need to talk." As they settled into Herbert's office, Sarah's sense of foreboding grew. The tension in the room was palpable, and she could see the worry etched in both men's faces. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Herbert sighed heavily, suddenly looking every one of his years. "It seems that Maxwell has been busier than we realized. He's called an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. He claims to have evidence of improprieties within the company." Robert's fists clenched at his sides. "It's a witch hunt, pure and simple. He's going after Sarah, trying to discredit her before she can pose a real threat to his position." Sarah's mind raced back to the conversation she had overheard. "He's been investigating me, hasn't he? Digging into my past?" Herbert nodded solemnly. "I'm afraid so. And he's not just stopping with you, my dear. He's threatening to expose some of the less savory aspects of our family history." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, a knot forming in the pit of her stomach. Robert and Herbert exchanged a loaded glance, years of unspoken secrets passing between them. "Sarah," Robert began hesitantly, "there are things about our family, about the early days of Titan Enterprises, that we're not proud of. Things that, if they came to light, could seriously damage the company's reputation." Sarah felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room. "What kinds of things?" Herbert leaned forward, his voice low. "In the beginning, when we were just starting out, we made some questionable decisions. Deals with people we shouldn't have dealt with, corners cut that shouldn't have been cut. We justified it at the time, telling ourselves it was necessary to get the company off the ground. But now those chickens are coming home to roost," Robert finished grimly. Sarah's mind whirled as she tried to process this information. The company she had come to believe in, the legacy she had been fighting to be a part of, it was all built on a foundation of lies and corruption. "How could you?" she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "How could you build all of this knowing it could come crashing down at any moment?" Herbert's shoulders sagged under the weight of his guilt. "We were young, ambitious, and foolish. We thought we could outrun our mistakes, that success would erase the past. But the past has a way of catching up with you, no matter how far or fast you run." Robert reached out to take Sarah's hand, but she pulled away, the hurt and betrayal evident in her eyes. "All this time," she said, her voice trembling, "I thought I was fighting for something good, something pure. But it was all a lie, wasn't it?" "No, Sarah," Robert pleaded. "The company may have had a trouble beginning, but it's grown into something much more than that. The good we've done, the lives we've improved, that's real. That's what you've been fighting for." Sarah stood abruptly, pacing the length of Herbert's office. Her mind raced with the implications of what she just learned. If Maxwell exposed these secrets, it wouldn't just be her position at risk, the entire company could crumble. "What exactly does Maxwell know?" she asked, turning to face her father and grandfather. Herbert sighed heavily. "We're not entirely sure. But given the timing and his confidence in calling this board meeting, we have to assume he's uncovered something significant." "Then we have to stop him," Sarah said, her voice filled with determination. "We can't let him destroy everything we've worked for." Robert and Herbert exchanged a surprised glance. "We?" Robert asked hesitantly. Sarah nodded firmly. "Yes, we. Despite everything, Titan Enterprises is still my family's legacy, my legacy. And I won't let Maxwell tear it down out of spite and greed." A small smile played at the corners of Herbert's mouth. "You truly are a Thornton, my dear. But I'm afraid it won't be that simple. Maxwell has been planning this for a long time. He'll have covered all his bases." "Then we'll just have to be smarter," Sarah replied, her mind already racing with possibilities. "We need to find out exactly what he knows and how he plans to use it. And we need allies, people on the board who will stand with us when Maxwell makes his move." As they began to formulate a plan, Sarah couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. Anger at the deception, disappointment in her family's past mistakes, but also a fierce determination to protect what she had come to see as her home. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Sarah, Robert, and Herbert worked tirelessly, reaching out to trusted board members, gathering evidence of the company's positive impact, and preparing for every possible scenario Maxwell might throw at them. As the time for the board meeting drew near, Sarah excused herself to freshen up. As she stood in the executive washroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror, she hardly recognized the woman looking back at her. Gone was the timid janitor in a faded uniform. In her place stood a confident businesswoman, her eyes blazing with purpose. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, smoothing down her tailored suit. "You're a Thornton, and Thorntons don't back down from a fight." With one last deep breath, Sarah stepped out into the hallway, ready to face whatever Maxwell had in store. As she approached the boardroom, she saw Amanda lingering near the door, an unreadable expression on her face. "Amanda," Sarah acknowledged cautiously. "Is everything all right?" Amanda glanced around nervously before leaning in close. "Listen, Sarah, I don't have much time. But you need to know, Maxwell's got more than just old family secrets. He's got something on you, something big." Sarah's heart raced. "What do you mean? What could he possibly have on me?" "I don't know the details," Amanda whispered urgently. "But it has something to do with your mother's death. Maxwell seems to think it wasn't an accident, and he's convinced it involves you somehow." Before Sarah could press for more information, the boardroom doors opened and Maxwell's voice boomed out. "Ah, cousin. So glad you could join us. We were just about to get started." Sarah straightened her spine and met Maxwell's gaze head-on. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, Maxwell." As she took her seat at the long mahogany table, Sarah could feel the tension in the room. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, their eyes darting between Maxwell, who stood at the head of the table with a predatory grin, and Herbert, who sat stoically at the other end. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Maxwell began, his voice dripping with false sincerity, "I've called this emergency meeting because I've uncovered some deeply troubling information that I believe poses a significant threat to the future of Titan Enterprises." Sarah's fingers tightened around the armrests of her chair as Maxwell launched into his presentation. He began by outlining some of the questionable deals from the company's early days, painting a picture of a corporation built on shaky ethical ground. As murmurs of concern rippled through the room, Sarah caught her grandfather's eye. Herbert gave her a subtle nod, and she knew it was time to put their plan into action. "If I may, Mr. Stone," Sarah interjected, rising to her feet. "While it's true that Titan Enterprises, like many companies, has made mistakes in its past, I think it's important to consider the bigger picture." Maxwell's eyes narrowed. "By all means, cousin. Enlighten us." With a calm she didn't entirely feel, Sarah began to present the evidence they had gathered: charts showing the company's charitable contributions, testimonials from employees whose lives had been improved by Titan's policies, data on the positive economic impact the company had on communities around the world. "Yes, there were missteps in the beginning," Sarah acknowledged. "But look at what Titan Enterprises has become. We're not just a profitable company, we're a force for good in the world. And that's something worth protecting, worth fighting for." As Sarah spoke, she could see the tide beginning to turn. Board members who had looked skeptical at the start of the meeting were now nodding along with her words. Even Amanda, standing at the back of the room, seemed impressed. But Maxwell was far from defeated. As Sarah concluded her presentation, he slow-clapped, his face twisted in a sneer. "A touching speech, cousin. Truly inspiring. But I'm afraid you're missing the point. This isn't just about the company's past indiscretions. This is about you." Sarah felt her blood run cold as Maxwell turned to address the board. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Sarah Johnson Thornton, the janitor turned heiress, the rags to riches story we've all been so captivated by. But did you ever stop to wonder how she came to be in such dire straits in the first place?" Maxwell dramatically unveiled a large poster board, covered in newspaper clippings and photographs. "Allow me to introduce you to the real Sarah Johnson." As Maxwell began to weave his tale, Sarah felt as though the floor was dropping out from beneath her. He spoke of her mother's death, not a tragic illness as Sarah had always believed, but a suspicious accident that had never been fully investigated. He hinted at Sarah's involvement, suggesting that she had been hiding dark secrets all along. "And let's not forget," Maxwell continued, his voice rising dramatically, "the years between her mother's death and her miraculous appearance at Titan Enterprises. Where was Sarah during that time? What was she really doing? I'll tell you where she wasn't. She wasn't in college. She wasn't building a career. No, our little Cinderella has a past far murkier than any of us could have imagined." Sarah stood frozen, her mind reeling. She could feel the eyes of every board member boring into her, their earlier sympathy replaced by suspicion and doubt. Even Robert and Herbert looked shaken, clearly caught off guard by the extent of Maxwell's accusations. For a moment, the room spun around her. Sarah felt as though she were back in that tiny apartment, clutching her mother's photograph, drowning in grief and uncertainty. But then, something inside her snapped into place. She was not that lost, broken girl anymore. She was Sarah Johnson Thornton, and she would not be beaten by lies and innuendo. "Is that all you've got, Maxwell?" Sarah's voice rang out, clear and strong. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. "You stand there, spinning tales and throwing around vague accusations, but where's your proof? Where's the evidence to back up these wild claims?" Maxwell's smug expression faltered slightly. "The proof is right here," he blustered, gesturing to his board of clippings. "The timeline speaks for itself." Sarah strode forward, her chin held high. "No, Maxwell. What you have there is a collection of half-truths and outright lies, cobbled together to suit your narrative. You want to know the truth about my past? Fine. I'll tell you." Taking a deep breath, Sarah turned to face the board. "Yes, my mother died when I was 18. And yes, it was sudden and unexpected. But it wasn't some nefarious plot, it was a hit-and-run accident. The driver was never found, and the case went cold. I was devastated, lost, and alone." Sarah's voice cracked slightly, but she pushed on. "The years that followed were hard. I worked multiple jobs, tried to make ends meet. I couldn't afford college, couldn't afford much of anything. But I never gave up. I never stopped trying to build a better life for myself. She turned back to Maxwell, fire in her eyes. You see my time at Titan Enterprises as some sort of con, a rags-to-riches fairy tale. But let me tell you something, cousin, every hour I spent mopping these floors, every moment of humiliation I endured at your hands, it made me stronger. It taught me the value of hard work, of perseverance, of treating people with kindness and respect no matter their station in life. Sarah's words hung in the air, the boardroom silence save for the sound of her ragged breathing. She could see the impact her speech had made. Board members who had looked doubtful moments ago now regarded her with a mixture of admiration and sympathy. Maxwell, sensing he was losing ground, tried to regain control. A touching story, to be sure. But it doesn't change the facts. You're still unqualified, still a liability to this company. The board can't possibly. I think, Herbert's voice cut through the tension, that the board is more than capable of making its own decisions, Maxwell. The old man stood slowly, his eyes fixed on his grandson. And I, for one, have heard enough. As Herbert began to speak, detailing his own observations of Sarah's work ethic, her innovative ideas, and her positive impact on company morale, Sarah felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. Despite the revelations about the company's past, despite the pain of having her own history laid bare, she knew in that moment that she had found her true family. The board meeting stretched on for hours, with arguments and counter-arguments flying back and forth. But in the end, it was clear that Maxwell's plan had backfired. Rather than discrediting Sarah, he had only succeeded in showcasing her resilience and determination. As the meeting finally adjourned, board members filed out, many pausing to shake Sarah's hand or offer words of encouragement. Maxwell stormed out without a word, his face a mask of barely contained rage. Sarah slumped into a chair, emotionally and physically exhausted. She felt a hand on her shoulder and looked up to see Robert standing beside her, his eyes brimming with a mixture of pride and regret. Sarah, I don't know what to say. I had no idea about your mother, about everything you've been through. Can you ever forgive me for not being there? Sarah considered his words carefully. The anger and hurt she had felt earlier hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had been tempered by the events of the day. I think, she said slowly, that we have a lot to talk about. But yes, I think forgiveness is possible. It's going to take time, though. Robert nodded, relief evident on his face. Time is something I'm more than willing to give. We have a lot of catching up to do. As father and daughter shared a tentative smile, Herbert approached, leaning heavily on his cane. Well, my dear, he said, his voice gruff with emotion, it seems you've weathered your first real corporate storm. How does it feel? Sarah let out a shaky laugh. Honestly? I feel like I could sleep for a week. But also like I finally know where I belong. Herbert's eyes twinkled. That's the Thornton spirit. Now, what do you say we get out of here and celebrate? I think we've all earned a stiff drink and a good meal. As they made their way out of the boardroom, Sarah caught sight of Amanda hovering nearby. You go on ahead, she told Robert and Herbert. I'll catch up in a minute. Approaching Amanda, Sarah saw a mixture of admiration and uncertainty in the other woman's eyes. That was quite something in there, Amanda said, her usual poise somewhat shaken. Sarah nodded. It was. And I have you to thank for the warning. I don't think I would have been as prepared without it. Amanda shrugged, trying to affect nonchalance. Yeah, well, let's just say I know what it's like to be on the receiving end of Maxwell's schemes. It was time someone stood up to him. Sarah studied Amanda for a moment, then made a decision. Listen, I know we haven't always seen eye to eye. But I meant what I said in there about the importance of treating people with respect. If you're interested, I think there might be a place for you on my team. A real position, not just as someone's assistant. What do you say?" Amanda's eyes widened in surprise. For a moment, her carefully cultivated image slipped, revealing the ambitious, intelligent woman beneath. I'd like that," she said finally, a genuine smile spreading across her face. As Sarah turned to leave, she felt lighter than she had in years. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still many challenges to face, relationships to mend, and a company to help guide into a more ethical future. But for the first time in her life, she didn't feel alone. She had found her place, her purpose, and her family. Little did Sarah know, the greatest challenge of her life was yet to come. For even as she celebrated her victory, forces were aligning against Titan Enterprises that would shake the company to its very core and force Sarah to confront the darkest secrets of her family's past. The next morning, Sarah arrived at Titan Enterprises feeling reinvigorated. The events of the previous day had been grueling, but she had emerged stronger for it. As she stepped off the elevator onto the executive floor, still a novelty that brought a small thrill, she was greeted by a flurry of activity. Ms. Johnson Thornton, her newly appointed assistant, Jake, called out as he hurried towards her. "Thank goodness you're here. We've got a situation." Sarah's brow furrowed as she took in Jake's harried expression. "What's going on?" Jake handed her a tablet, his voice low and urgent. "It's all over the news. Someone leaked documents to the press, old contracts, emails, financial records. It's not good." Sarah's heart sank as she scanned the headlines flashing across the screen. Titan Enterprises exposed, decades of corruption unveiled. Thornton family legacy built on lies. Insider reveals dark secrets of corporate giant. "How bad is it?" she asked, her mind already racing with potential damage control strategies. Jake's grimace told her everything she needed to know. "It's pretty bad. The stock is in freefall, investors are panicking, and we've already had calls from several major clients threatening to pull their contracts." Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for the battle ahead. "All right. Get me Herbert and Robert. We need to formulate a response, and fast. And Jake? See if you can track down the source of the leak. I have a feeling I know who's behind this, but we need proof." As Jake hurried off to carry out her instructions, Sarah strode purposefully towards the conference room. She had barely settled in when Herbert and Robert burst through the doors, both looking as though they'd aged years overnight. "I assume you've seen the news," Herbert said grimly, lowering himself into a chair at the head of the conference table. His face was drawn, the weight of decades of secrets finally taking its toll. Robert paced anxiously behind him, his fingers drumming an erratic rhythm against his thigh. "This is a disaster. Everything we've worked for, everything we've built, it's all crumbling around us." Sarah took a moment to gather her thoughts, her mind racing with the implications of the leak. The situation was dire, there was no denying that. But as she looked at the defeated expressions on her father's and grandfather's faces, she felt a surge of determination. "All right," she said, her voice steady and calm. "Let's take a step back and assess the situation. What exactly has been leaked, and how much of it is verifiable?" Herbert sighed heavily, pushing a stack of papers across the table. "It's worse than we thought, Sarah. Whoever is behind this, and we all know it's Maxwell, they've managed to get their hands on documents dating back to the very founding of Titan Enterprises. Old contracts with less than reputable clients. Financial records showing some creative accounting. Even personal correspondence that paints our family in a less than flattering light." Sarah's eyes widened as she flipped through the documents. The scope of the leak was staggering, and the implications were clear. This wasn't just a PR nightmare, it was an existential threat to the entire company. We need to get ahead of this, she said, her mind already formulating a plan. Trying to deny it or cover it up will only make things worse. We need to own up to our mistakes, take responsibility, and show the world that Titan Enterprises is committed to change. Robert stopped his pacing, turning to face Sarah with a mix of surprise and skepticism. You want us to admit to all of this? Sarah, that could destroy us completely. And trying to hide it won't? Sarah countered. The truth is already out there. Our only choice now is how we respond to it. Herbert leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Sarah. What exactly are you proposing, my dear? Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would shape the future of Titan Enterprises and her family forever. I think we need to hold a press conference. Today. We lay it all out, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We acknowledge the mistakes of the past, but we also highlight the positive changes we've made and the good we've done. As Robert and Herbert exchanged uncertain glances, Sarah pressed on. But more than that, we need to make a commitment to real, lasting change. Full transparency in all our dealings moving forward. A comprehensive ethics review of all our current contracts and partnerships. And a significant portion of our profits dedicated to righting the wrongs of the past, whether that's through charitable initiatives, environmental restoration, or direct restitution to those we've harmed. The room fell silent as her words hung in the air. Sarah could see the conflict playing out on her father's and grandfather's faces, the fear of losing everything they had built warring with the knowledge that she was right. Finally, Herbert spoke, his voice quiet but firm. It's a risk. A big one. But I think it might be our only chance. He turned to Robert. What do you think, son? Robert ran a hand through his hair, his expression torn. It goes against everything we've done for years. The idea of airing all our dirty laundry in public, it terrifies me. He paused, then met Sarah's gaze. But I trust you, Sarah. If you think this is the right path, then I'm with you. Sarah felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Despite everything, the years of separation, the recent revelations, her family was putting their faith in her. She wouldn't let them down. All right then, she said, straightening her shoulders. Let's get to work. We have a lot to do and not much time to do it. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Sarah, Robert, and Herbert worked tirelessly to craft a statement that was both honest about the company's past misdeeds and hopeful about its future. They reached out to key board members, major shareholders, and longtime employees, preparing them for what was to come. As the time for the press conference approached, Sarah found herself alone in her office, taking a moment to gather her thoughts. The weight of what she was about to do pressed heavily on her shoulders. She was about to change the course of Titan Enterprises forever, for better or for worse. A soft knock at the door interrupted her reverie. She looked up to see Amanda standing in the doorway, an uncharacteristically hesitant expression on her face. Hey, Amanda said, fidgeting with the hem of her blouse. I just wanted to check in. Are you sure about this? Sarah nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. As sure as I can be. It's a risk, but I think it's the right thing to do. Amanda was quiet for a moment, then said, You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just some naive girl way out of her depth. But now... She shook her head, a hint of admiration in her eyes. You're something else, Sarah Johnson Thornton. Thanks, Amanda, Sarah replied, touched by the unexpected show of support. That means a lot coming from you. As Amanda turned to leave, she paused in the doorway. Oh, and Sarah? Whatever happens out there today, I've got your back. With those words of encouragement bolstering her resolve, Sarah made her way to the lobby of Titan Enterprises, where a sea of reporters and cameras awaited. As she stepped up to the podium, flanked by Robert and Herbert, she could feel the tension in the air, the hungry anticipation of the press corps eager for their pound of flesh. Taking a deep breath, Sarah began to speak. "Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Johnson Thornton, and I'm here today to address the recent allegations regarding Titan Enterprises and the Thornton family." As Sarah laid bare the company's checkered past, acknowledging mistakes and outlining plans for restitution and reform, she could see the shock and disbelief on the faces of the reporters. This level of transparency from a major corporation was unprecedented. But as she continued, speaking passionately about her vision for a new era of ethical business practices and corporate responsibility, something in the room began to shift. The initial skepticism gave way to cautious interest, and then to something that looked almost like hope. When Sarah finished her prepared statement and opened the floor for questions, the barrage was intense. Reporters fired query after query, probing for weaknesses, looking for inconsistencies. But Sarah stood firm, answering each question with honesty and conviction. As the press conference drew to a close, Sarah felt drained but oddly invigorated. She had done it. She had laid everything on the line, and while the road ahead would be difficult, she knew in her heart that it was the right choice. The days and weeks that followed were a roller coaster of highs and lows. As expected, Titan Enterprises took a significant hit in the short term. The stock price plummeted, some investors jumped ship, and there were calls for criminal investigations into past dealings. But something unexpected happened as well. As news of Titan's radical transparency spread, it sparked a national conversation about corporate ethics and responsibility. Other companies found themselves under pressure to follow suit, to be more open about their own practices and histories. Slowly but surely, Titan began to rebuild its reputation. Sarah's commitment to change wasn't just talk, she implemented sweeping reforms throughout the company, from top to bottom. New ethical guidelines were put in place, overseen by an independent board. A significant portion of profits was channeled into a foundation dedicated to addressing the harm caused by past corporate practices, not just Titan's but across the industry. Perhaps most surprisingly, many of Titan's employees rallied around the new direction. They had always known, on some level, that things weren't entirely above board, but now they felt pride in being part of a company that was genuinely trying to do better. Through it all, Sarah worked tirelessly, pouring every ounce of her energy and passion into rebuilding Titan Enterprises as a beacon of ethical business practices. There were setbacks and struggles, moments of doubt and fear, but she persevered. And as the months passed, something remarkable began to happen. Titan's stock price began to recover. New investors, attracted by the company's commitment to transparency and social responsibility, began to buy in. Clients who had initially distanced themselves started to return, drawn by the positive press and the genuine changes they saw happening. 1 year to the day after the fateful press conference, Sarah stood in her office, looking out over the New York skyline. The view was the same as it had always been, but everything else had changed. A knock at the door drew her attention. She turned to see Herbert entering, leaning on his cane but looking more energized than he had in years. "Quite a view, isn't it?" he said, coming to stand beside her at the window. Sarah nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "It never gets old." Herbert was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know, when I first brought you into this company, I thought I was doing you a favor. Giving you a chance at the life you deserved." He shook his head, chuckling softly. "I never imagined you'd end up saving us all." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. "I couldn't have done it without you, grandfather. Without all of you." Herbert placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes shining with pride. "You've done more than just save the company, Sarah. You've redeemed our family name. You've given Titan Enterprises a legacy to be proud of." As they stood there, looking out over the city, Sarah felt a sense of peace wash over her. The road had been long and difficult, filled with challenges she never could have imagined when she first stepped foot in Titan Enterprises as a janitor. But standing here now, she knew that every struggle, every setback, had been worth it. Titan Enterprises wasn't just a company anymore. It was a symbol of what was possible when profit and ethics worked hand in hand. And Sarah Johnson Thornton, once mocked and underestimated, was now recognized as a pioneer in corporate responsibility. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Sarah thought about how far she had come. From a struggling janitor to the leader of a Fortune 500 company, she had faced adversity at every turn. But through it all, she had stayed true to herself and her values. The story of Sarah Johnson Thornton and Titan Enterprises would be told for years to come, a testament to the power of integrity, perseverance, and the unwavering belief that one person really could make a difference. Epilogue. 5 years later, Sarah stood at another podium, this time accepting an award for Corporate Citizen of the Year. As she looked out over the crowd, she saw faces both familiar and new. Her father, Robert, beaming with pride. Amanda, now head of Titan's Ethics and Compliance Division, giving her a subtle thumbs up. Even Maxwell was there, his expression unreadable but no longer filled with the bitterness and anger of years past. As Sarah began her acceptance speech, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The hardships, the betrayals, the moments of doubt, they had all shaped her, molded her into the leader she had become. "When I first joined Titan Enterprises," she began, her voice clear and strong, "I was invisible. A janitor, looked down upon by those who thought themselves my betters. But I learned something important in those early days, something that has guided me ever since. True worth isn't measured by the size of your office or the number of zeros in your paycheck. It's measured by the impact you have on the lives of others." She paused, her eyes scanning the rapt faces before her. Titan Enterprises isn't perfect. We've made mistakes, and we'll probably make more in the future. But what sets us apart is our commitment to owning those mistakes, to learning from them, and to always striving to do better. As Sarah concluded her speech to thunderous applause, she felt a sense of completion. The girl who had once scrubbed floors and endured mockery had found her voice, her purpose, and in doing so, had changed not just her own life, but the lives of countless others. And as she stepped down from the podium, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring, Sarah knew one thing with absolute certainty: this was only the beginning.